It's Monday, December 15, 2014, regular board meeting of District 64. Vicki, please take the roll.
Dan Collins.
Dan will be joining us. Oh, he's here. Hi, Dan.
Dathan Paterno.
Dathan will be here in a little bit.
Scott Zimmerman.
Here.
Tony Borelli.
Here.
Vicki Lee is here. John Heidi.
Here.
Bob Johnson.
Here.
I've got a series of announcements and statements to make regarding the meeting, but I'll make that for the regular meeting. We do have a closed session that we're going to go into a number of topics to be discussed, and the closed session will be collective negotiating matters, 5 Illinois compiled statutes 122C2, as well as pending litigation of 5 Illinois compiled statutes 122C11. I'll need a second. Thank you. And we'll have to take a vote to go into close. Bob?
Yes. Aye.
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
And Dan?
Aye.
Great. All right, good evening, everybody. We're reconvening the regular board meeting. We have spent the last hour or so in closed session, and now we will reconvene into our public hearing on the tax levy. Danny, are you there?
Note that Dathan joined the meeting since we last did the roll call.
That's true.
Yes.
Before we get started, can I ask, do we have an obligation, because this is a public hearing, to call the meeting to order? Do you take the role, conduct the public hearing, move to adjourn the public hearing?
All right. So as we begin the public hearing, Vicki, would you please retake the roll?
Dathan Paterno.
Here.
Scott Zimmerman.
Here.
Tony Borelli.
Here.
Vicki Lee is here. John Heidi.
Here.
Bob Johnson.
Here.
Dan Collins.
Here.
Okay. We are in our public hearing. Becky, I will give it to you.
Annually, the district holds a public hearing because it's good public policy to do so, and it makes us transparent to our community. We are obligated, if we were going to raise our levy in excess of 5%, to hold a public hearing. But again, we're not required to do that. It is good policy to do so. In the summer of 2013, the board adopted some consensus goals. And during that process, we extended the referendum commitment for an additional 4 years to 2021. One of the finance operating goals that weekend that we set the operating principle was to levy to the maximum revenue under the PTEL formula. And although we're asking for a total of 4.6 tonight, including debt service, we only expect to receive 1.7%. And the difference between that is a factor for new construction. And unfortunately, the way the system operates is that we will not have a good handle on what our new construction will be until June. And everything that we're doing tonight is based upon estimates and past history. And so that we have typically asked for an amount in excess so that the PTEL formula allows us to do exactly what the board said in the summer of 2013, is to maximize our revenue under this formula. So again, it's public comment. It's an opportunity for our community to stand up and make a statement about the levy process and the dollars that we're levying. And so I would turn it back to you, Dr. Borelli.
Okay, thank you. Again, I asked my rhetorical questions to be very, very clear on these issues. According to the PTEL formula, the district is to be expecting 1.5%?
1.7%.
1.7%.
The CPI factor is 1.5.
Yes.
And we're currently projecting a small amount for new construction, bringing the total levy to 1.7%.
And we're asking for 4.5%, and that difference is an amount that the Cook County has yet to allocate.
Correct.
And we have increased it simply to capture whatever Cook County allocates.
Correct.
Okay. Being that this is a public hearing, I encourage and ask anybody who has any comments on the tax levy, please come up to the podium and make any statements or have any questions. Sure.
opportunity to address you all.
If you could state your name, please.
Mark Lyons. I'm a taxpayer here in Park Ridge. I own my own home. I grew up here in Park Ridge as I went to the schools, at least through elementary school. And I don't have a heck of a lot to say, but for the fact that, 4 years I've been owning a home here in Park Ridge, my property taxes have gone up 39%. I'm a single guy, working 60 to 70 hours a week. I did a search on salaries for what's being paid out in the district here. And I saw that we had 425 salaries being paid over $100,000, some over $200,000. And I don't know how this district can justify going back to the taxpayers asking for more money when guys like me, I got people on my block who see eye to eye with me in what I'm saying right here. Just can't afford any more increases. So please take that into consideration before you look inside, look for ways to be more cost efficient. By profession, I'm a facility manager at a private high school. The board looks to me for creative ways to save money, and I do it. I've had to lay people off. It's not fun, but there's many ways you guys can do it. So I'm asking you to look creatively. If it means privatizing custodial services, go for it. I know some people may not like to hear that. You're given an obligation to find the most cost-efficient way to operate your schools before you come to us and ask for more money. Thank you. Thanks.
My name is Steve Schildwachter. I live at 232 Meacham Avenue. Been in Park Ridge for 10 years. Just to give a point of reference versus the previous speaker, in the 10 years that I've been here, my property taxes have gone up 100%. The share of my property taxes accounted for by District 64 has gone up about 110%. It actually was 120% on a dollar basis until I had to go and try to get my assessment changed, which only means that I've put that extra 10% increase on my neighbors. I think you all know how that works. I was very disturbed to read in the local paper the piece of analysis that said that the district was trying to get as much tax revenue as possible without increasing tax rates to the point that a voter referendum would be needed to approve them. Now, it wasn't a quote, but given the level of journalism of our local news media here, I don't think that they made that up. It had to have come at least on background from somebody. And I heard in the preamble tonight that the idea was to maximize revenue. So when I hear maximize revenue, I hear minimize my savings account, my children's college fund. This isn't just about the children who are in the schools, it's about all the children. So every bit that the taxes have increased, 100% in my case over the past 10 years, takes away my ability to save for my family's future. I don't think that this board or this administration has considered that. Obviously not if the taxes have increased so much over the last 10 years, just that I've been here. And to ask for 4.6%, which exceeds the Consumer Price Index, which is one of the standards by which the tax levy can be increased, not must, but can be increased without going to the voters for a referendum, seems ambitious. It is definitely an attempt, as was said, to maximize revenue, which again minimizes my savings and the savings of all my neighbors, at least the ones who are smart enough to try and have their property tax bill reduced. Voting, obviously, I wish that you would vote no on 4.6% tax increase. I know that it's already preordained that you get 1.7. If you vote yes on 4.6%, it sends a message to the community that you think we're made of money and that we can continually send you more and more and more. But we can't. It has to stop at some point. You can stop it tonight by voting no and submitting something that is much more reasonable. If you wind up with something from I gather that there might be a little game of chicken that you're playing with Cook County here, that you feel you have to ask for 4.6 in order to get 1.7. Is that true? Sorry, you're going to have to do with less than 1.7. Frankly, after 100% increases after 10 years, 1.7 is more than we can bear. There is no reason for you to vote for 4.6, and certainly not to grab as much money as you can without having to go to the voters for a referendum. Because then when the referendum comes, you may not get the result that you want. The last few referendums have passed just by getting out the PTO and people who are very interested, and I think you banked on the fact that the 2/3 of homeowners here in town don't pay attention. You're right, they don't, but that's because they're not informed. Tonight there's a Bears game. People have lives, they have to help their children with their homework in the evenings. The fact that 2 people showed up here to comment one way or the other tonight, to me, is nothing short of a miracle. The last time I came here, I was the only person, a year and a half ago. There are more of us out here. I would not take the fact that only 1 or 2 people show up as license to say, community doesn't care, we'll vote yes on the 4.6. There are a lot of people in the community that want you to vote no on the 4.6. They should show up, I agree. But you underestimate the resentment that people will feel and understand if you vote yes tonight. There's one other thing that I'd like to ask about. On some of the message boards on Facebook and the things that the citizenry starts, there's been a lot of discussion about all-day kindergarten, or specifically federally mandated all-day kindergarten. That is mentioned often in the same breath as, well, if you don't like your taxes now, wait till the budgets rise in order to pay for all-day kindergarten. I've researched, perhaps somebody on this board can clarify for me, but once we adopt all-day kindergarten, as far as I can tell, it's not a federal mandate. There's a federal opportunity to get additional funds for communities that put in all-day kindergarten, but it's a state-by-state decision, as I understand. Dr. Hines is not here.
Kindergarten is not required in the state.
That is correct. And if it were to be added, the state gives the provision for the families that take advantage of the all-day kindergarten to be charged tuition for the other part of the day. Is that true?
The variety of structure that we want.
My source on that is the Children's Defense Fund, not exactly a right-wing nutshot group. So, thank you for the dialogue. I appreciate it. I know it's a hearing because I can tell you're listening, but I would ask, please vote no on the 4.6%. It's too much. We've already paid too much. Thank you.
Any other public comments on the tax levy? And not seeing any, I will suggest that we adjourn to our regular board meeting, adjourn from the public hearing and resume our regular meeting. No other comments then.
I think you need to have a motion to adjourn.
Yes.
Vote to adjourn. I guess we do one motion, right, to adjourn and then open session.
Open session,
I
and
also move.
is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Now, all agree?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. As we open our regular meeting, there is an opportunity for public comments in the regular meeting outside of comments for the public hearing. So if there's any comments to be made on anything not on the agenda tonight, you can please come forward and come to the lectern and make your comments. Not seeing any, we will resume our regular meeting. And the first thing tonight, we have a recognition and celebration of a physical education department at Lincoln School. Dr. Heinz.
So we have representatives here tonight from the Illinois Association for Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance. And they will be honoring the Lincoln Physical Education Department for receiving a Blue Ribbon Award. Will members of the Lincoln School Phys Ed Department, as well as our IAHPERD group, come on up to the lectern? Dr. Murray, if you could, please introduce your staff.
Be happy
And
to.
then we'll turn it over to the group bestowing the honor to tell us a little bit about how this honor was received and just how tricky it is to acquire. And we'll go from there.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone on the board and everyone else here. We're very excited tonight for this recognition. Lincoln Middle School is very lucky and privileged to have a wonderful, wonderful group of physical education educators who really get middle school kids and understand not just their physical needs, but also what they need socially and emotionally to help them grow as people. So it is my pleasure tonight to introduce our physical education department. Christy Janicki, Mrs. Lynn Cohen, Mr. Dale Haas, Bob Barker, not that one, and Mr. and Mr. Ron Caccini down here. So I'm here to say a little bit more about the Blue Ribbon Honor is Maureen Fournier from Iford. There you go.
How do you say it in the short?
IAFOD. It's much easier. It's a big mouthful otherwise.
It sure is.
First of all, I'd like to thank you very much for inviting me here to speak. This is something that's very near and dear to my heart. I've been involved with the Blue Ribbon program since its inception in 1999. In order for a school to receive a Blue Ribbon, they have to do a 7-page self-criteria. They have to look at their curriculum, their instruction, their facilities, health and safety issues, and the administration. So there are probably about 80 to 90 line items that they need to go through and rate themselves on. They have to send in a huge binder with the curriculum, with lesson plans, with assessments, with their yearly plan, things that they do extra, maybe a fun run, community activities, how the school is involved in the community, how the school and physical education is involved in the total program of the school setting itself. This is very rigorous. All the information gets sent to us. We have a checklist to make sure everything is there. And then they have a site visit in which we have evaluators come out and spend the whole day looking at all of the documentation, interviewing students, staff, parents. Sometimes we even have board members come in and interview with us, and administration. And then at the end of the day, those evaluators make a recommendation. They write down all the good things that they saw, and they also have recommendations for what can be improved. I am happy to say that Lincoln Middle School is one of very few schools that have received it 4 times. So you should be very proud of that. I also would like to thank the school board and the administration, because without you and your support, this would not have happened. And studies have shown that student test scores improve with quality daily physical education. Daily physical education and 30 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity daily will not only grow brain cells, but will also help the children learn in their cognitive abilities. So, and even now we are working on the neurosciences We are starting to teach the neurosciences of physical education, which goes hand in hand in cognitive abilities. We hear so much about test scores, test scores, test scores, test scores. I mean, you hear it all the time. Quality physical education is important to keep your test scores up. Giving the children that time to have moderate to vigorous activity on a daily basis really develops their cognitive ability. Most children nowadays are latchkey kids. They go home from school, they sit in front of the TV, they sit in front of their computer, they sit with their games. They do not get out like they did when we were all growing up, where we had to walk to school, parents drive to school. They do not get that daily activity. And so Lincoln Middle School has done a phenomenal job of preparing your students and teaching them how to be healthy, how to be physically fit, and how to increase their cognitive abilities. And because of your support, and hopefully your continued support, they will continue to improve, your students will continue to improve, and I will be back here in 5 more years. So I would like to, on behalf of IAFERD, I have a present for each one of you. It's a pen that says IAFERD Blue Ribbon Winners.
For our gym, the fourth one, our fourth band.
And this will go outside right outside the window.
Bernadette, where you want?
Well, that's wonderful to see recognition like that, and we have further recognition coming up. I won't say rare, but a unique opportunity to recognize our staff member for achieving a high certification. Dr. Hines.
District 64 is proud to announce tonight that one of our second grade teachers at Franklin School, Natalie Schutz, has recently earned her national board certification. This is truly a tremendous accomplishment, and we are very proud of her, not only for undertaking such a rigorous process, but for actually earning it. She joins only 3 other teachers in District 64 that have earned their national board certification. Susan Glines from Emerson, Mike O'Malley from Field, and Linda Dykeman from Roosevelt have also obtained this advanced credential. So I emailed Natalie over the weekend. See how dedicated she is? She's checking email over the weekend to say, could you reflect for me for just a few minutes on the process? And she said, truly, in an email back to me, it was the most worthwhile and rewarding experience in her teaching career. And she also went on to say that it was more rigorous than earning a master's degree. So that's a little bit of background on Natalie and the process. So without further ado, I would love for Natalie to come up and be recognized for earning this wonderful and rigorous accomplishment. before we knew that Natalie was undertaking this National Board Certification endeavor, Dr. Lopez and I started talking about National Board Certification. So, as a new superintendent, it's what's been done in the past, how many teachers have National Board Certification. Have we ever thought about trying to do a cohort or some kind of outreach to our teachers to make going through National Board Certification something that more would consider? Because we certainly do feel as though we have a lot of in-house talent that if they put their mind to it, they could achieve this award. So Lori and I have begun to investigate what it would entail to bring a cohort program to District 64. So we know that we could probably get grant funding for it through the National Board Resource Center. And they've had a very strong history in recent years of funding almost 100% of the cost of seeking National Board Certification. So it's rigorous in terms of time and teacher reflection and practice, but there's also a cost attached to it, as you would expect. So the National Board Research Center grant would allow for teachers to have the $1,900 registration fee paid for out of the grant funds. It's quite a bit of money. The only thing that the teachers would have to invest beyond countless hours to write the application would be a $75 fee to embark on the certification process. The grant, we believe, would most likely then allow us to pay a cohort leader or two $3,000 to help facilitate the paperwork and the videotaping and the self-reflection that goes along with moving towards National Board Certification readiness. So Lori and I are still in the process of ironing out some details, but we have been in communication, as I've said, with the National Board Research Center. And it would be our hope that in January we're going to come forward saying we've locked down grant funding and we would like to really be able to honor this cohort. I believe we would need 7 teachers to be willing to participate to have the ability to do a cohort in district. So we have a little bit of work to do. We'll work on that in January and see if we can drum up some interest and continue to expand how many teachers are interested in seeking and then ultimately earning National Board Certification.
Thank you, Dr. Heinz. I think that's a wonderful endeavor. I think it's going to be received with open arms.
I hope so.
Yeah. With the board's indulgence, I'd like to take the last item on our current agenda, which is the discussion on CSBO individual, and move it up to this point now. It is found on, the item is found on page 196 of our current packet, but we'll move it up to now. And Dr. Heinz, would you like to discuss this?
Oh, yes, I would. So a number of months ago, we posted a position for a replacement, a CSBO replacement for Becky. Now, I've often said no one can replace Becky Allard. We'll be sad to see her go. But as she rides off into the sunset to start her next chapter, TBD, I keep telling her Hawaii, but she's not sure, we need to find somebody to be our next CSBO. So Mr. Martin posted the job opening on a variety of application sites, K-12 Job Spot, the Illinois Association of School Officials, our website, and after several months of posting, we had 39 external candidates interested in serving as our next CSBO. So a committee was formed and we did a paper screening. We had mostly the ESC or senior leaders from cabinet participate in the initial screening. We brought in 7 applicants. Of the 7 applicants, we felt that there was a clear divide and that very quickly we had 2 candidates kind of bubble to the top that we knew we would like to bring towards the final round of interviews. It was at that time that we had a larger team participate in interviews. We had Mrs. Lee as a board representative. We had several building principals, teachers, central office administrators, and one of the teachers was a member of our PREA executive board. And we also had the assistant business manager, Brian Emhoff, and Peggy Morgan, who is the administrative assistant to Becky in the interview process, because they will obviously be working very closely with our new CSBO. So after what we thought was a rigorous interview process, I had one-to-one interviews with our 2 finalists and then made the determination that Luann Polstead was going to be our preferred candidate. I'm going to tell you a little bit about why we are hoping to hire Luann tonight. First of all, she has a lovely disposition, a warm personality. Once she told me she had a wicked sense of humor, she quickly gained favor in my eyes, because anyone that knows me knows I too have that type of sense of humor. And we can talk more about that at a later time. But beyond her warm interpersonal skills and the attributes of really being collaborative and a team player, those shone through. When we looked at her resume and her work history, she's kind of had so many things, experience with so many things that we need in the CSBA. She's worked a referendum. She's worked construction, master facility. She's done the budgeting process, the levy process, worked with construction management firms, all things that we know are on our horizon. So we just felt that her work experience along with her disposition would make her a terrific addition to our team. She has worked as an accountant in Hinsdale District 181. She has worked as a CSBO in Mundelein District 75, and most currently is serving as a CSBO in Prospect Heights District 23, I believe. And she's been there since 2010. So while I'm sure they'll be sad to lose her, we feel their loss is our gain. And that is a little bit about Luann, and she could stand and come up and join us for just a moment. I hope that you will approve her as our next chief school business official. Do you want to come to the podium, or?
Well, we have to.
Yes, you have to.
So this is an action item. We've all had the opportunity to listen to Dr. Heinz, and we discussed it. Do I have a motion to make this hire?
Sure, I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, approve the appointment of Luann Kolstad as Chief School Business Official effective July 1, 2015.
Is there a second?
I second.
Why don't we start with Bob?
Aye.
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 Yes?
Aye.
Aye.
And Dan?
Aye.
Great. Congratulations, Luann.
Welcome.
I just wanted to say thank you very much for this opportunity. When I first came and met with your team, I was very excited. You have a very dynamic administration within Park Ridge, and I'm really looking forward to working with everyone here and basically joining your family. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next item on our agenda is something that was found beginning on page 9 in our packets, and it's the school calendar. We've had quite a bit of discussion about this. We have sent out a survey, district-wide survey, to get the feelings of the folks in the district, and administration is prepared to present to us a calendar for the 15-16 school year. Dr. Heinz.
Sure. So as you know, we have been working throughout the year with our internal calendar committee in direct response from District 207's decision to change their calendar. That said, we do engage in an internal calendar committee on a yearly basis because we need to create a calendar that we think will allow us best to honor the contract and educate our students. So as Dr. Borelli said, we put out a survey to both staff and parents, and we received a total of 1,229 responses, 393 of which were from our staff. And they answered 8 simple questions that we thought were simple yet important in terms of what should we consider and place the highest level of value to in terms of creating our calendar. So after carefully reviewing the results at a meeting last week, the committee developed the 2015 recommended draft calendar that you should have in your packet. And if you are in the audience, there should have been one available on the table. A few things of note when we're looking at the results. Not surprising, many of our parents have children in 2 districts, and they wanted as much similarity with those calendars as possible. So if you look at our proposed start date within the District 64 calendar, we would start on Monday, August 27th. The committee really felt that starting on a Monday would be more palatable, not only for staff, having to come back on an institute on a Friday, but would also be better for students rather than starting school on a Friday, having a weekend, and then having to remind them of all the things that we just taught them on the Friday before. So we're going to move our start date, our proposed start date with teachers to a Monday, and with our teachers coming on that institute day, our students rather coming on August 18th. It's a few days off from the high school, but we didn't think it was so significant in doing so. We thought that there was a more benefit to our younger students at the K-8 level, having that extra weekend and starting during the middle of a week as opposed to the end of a week like the high school's doing. So we're one day off in terms of start. The Thanksgiving recess, as well as the winter recess, are fairly well lined up as well. One big difference between District 64 and District 207 is the week of Thanksgiving. They don't have those 5 days off. They typically have the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Our staff historically has had that full week off, and one is a traded day for conferences, and one is just a day that we're not in attendance. And that, from the committee perspective as well as the survey perspective, was something that our staff was very interested in keeping in place. When we moved to the winter recess, our winter recesses we were able to sync them up pretty tightly. The difference being that the high school does exams, and that, again, as you may recall, is one of the primary reasons they decided to change their calendar, was so they could get their winter exams in before the students left for winter break, allowing the kids to really spend time relaxing with friends and family over the break. So they would test on a Thursday, Friday, and they would have 2 weeks plus a day off, coming back to school on Tuesday, January 5th. We would have the same 2 weeks off, but we would come back to school on that Monday. Again, older kids home, younger kids are in school, because one of the things the parents did say is, if the older kids are in session and the younger kids are off, sometimes we need them to babysit. But if the younger kids are in session and the older kids are off, we didn't think that posed as much of an imposition to parents, because the little ones are in school while the older ones are off. Continuing down, spring break was another very important holiday to try to be lockstep with, and we do have the same spring break. It so happens that there's a Good Friday in there, and then we have the week off, and that completely parallels the high school. Lastly, there's a slight difference between District 64's proposed last day of school and District 207's last day of school. And they knew that by starting earlier, having winter break exams before the kids left for winter break, that they would be ending towards the end of May. And they are, in fact, ending. Their last day of school would be May 27th, which is a Friday. Actually, that Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday are the final exams for the high schoolers. Based on our calendar, without any polar vortex days, we would be ending school on Thursday, June 2nd, which is actually a pretty nice end date for anybody. Noting at the bottom, when you see an XED in June 3rd, if you look at your calendar where there's an asterisk, it says only on the 5th or greater inclement weather day would require an additional day of school. So if we had 4 inclement weather days and went to 5, our last day of school would be Friday, June 3rd. So weather permitting, our last day of school with this calendar would be Thursday, June 2nd. Over the weekend, there was communication between the different board members and myself. One of the questions had to do with 8th graders. Since they'll still be in session until June 2nd, what would happen at the high school in terms of summer school? So I reached out to Dr. Wallace, the superintendent at the high school, and he said they would in fact delay the start of summer school. So our 8th graders, or our freshmen, soon to be freshmen, would be allowed to participate in summer school. So they're prepared to do that if we don't go lockstep with their calendar. They're willing to flex that week. So that is our proposed calendar, with a little bit of kind of insight into how we landed on this calendar. And I'll entertain questions, and certainly there are many members of the administrative team that were part of this process. If any of you are willing to come up and answer questions, if the board has any, please feel free to do so.
Let me direct the question to the board. Are there any comments on the proposed school calendar?
Can I ask a question? Sure. I think I sent an email. Did we ever find out how many respondents answered the questions on a mobile phone versus a laptop? And for the board, I don't know, I didn't share with everyone because I don't want to have an open meeting violation act, but I had a constituent contact me, and it's a friend actually, to say, hey, I'm trying to fill out your survey, and on a phone, when I rank them and I change things or I move on the screen, it changes the ordering of which day do I want to start, August 24th or whatever. And then she sent it to me and she sent it to my wife, and I was like, I kind of noticed the same thing. So I had sent something, and I guess there's something with SurveyMonkey where they have a disclaimer out there that can act funny on a mobile phone. I don't think we articulated that to the entire community. So the question around that, I was concerned about, is it valid? Because if half are mobile phones and half are not, seeing the difference between starting August 24th and August 18th, it's pretty close. It's like 47%, 37%. I'm curious how many are mobile phones, because what it did, as I understand it, I could be wrong, is it kind of put that first one back on the top. So I don't know how many false positives are on the first result. Do we know how many mobile phones? SurveyMonkey, were they able to tell us? No?
MJ, you're going to have to come up to the mic or else it won't be heard.
So from what we understand, SurveyMonkey does not pull back that data,
Okay.
especially since we sent out a method by which the access to the survey is facilitated through an email link, so that we would get a unique count.
Okay, I just didn't know if a lot of websites and analytic tools will capture what browser you are, and from that browser you can infer, oh, I'm on Safari versus X, and I know it's an iPhone at that point, or I'm on, you know what I mean? So I didn't know if SurveyMonkey could give us that, because, I mean, in talking to people, August 18th I'm hearing from a lot of people, that's really early, right? At least this is the comment I'm hearing from my little group of, at least people who talk to me, and so when I saw that they were so close, I had concerns about the validity of that. I think it's overwhelming about, line up spring break and Christmas and all that, but the actual start of the day, I think, I just personally, in hearing from people I know, I just think it's a week too early, and so I didn't know if there was an answer that would make me really feel comfortable that, no, overwhelmingly everyone prefers starting on the 18th or whatever, So that's why I just wanted to ask the question.
Well, there's two concerns here. One is whether the data is valid, and the second is whether we want to decide to go with that recommendation. So let me talk about that first component about the false positives. I used a laptop, so I didn't use a phone when I filled out my survey. Are you aware, Scott, of when people were using a phone, was it quite obvious that the data that you were putting in was being altered? And I'm wondering if that's the case. I would assume that most people at that point would stop using their phone to complete the survey.
Right. From what I gather, and it's a limited set, so I can't say it's a representative sample, and I did it on a computer too, I did it at work when I was there, but it wasn't really noticeable. I mean, you might notice it, but it wasn't blindingly obvious, like how could you miss this occurred? It was more you're answering the question, and then you might have changed it, it kind of rejigged it, and you went on to the next question, so she just happened to notice, and so that's why I had the concern, and I brought it up, and I know there's a disclaimer out there, so, and the only reason I ask is that's the big question for me, where I think it's kind of on the bubble, and I was looking for the survey to really guide me a little bit on this, and I guess my answer is, I don't know that the survey guides me any more than before we took it.
Was it happening on every question, or was it just on one?
I think it was the ones where you asked to rank 3 things, and it was changing because there's logic in the browser that's saying, well, if you make this now 1, make this one, make your number 3 2, and you know what I mean? So I don't know that it functions fully the way that it's intended in certain mobile browsers, is my understanding. So
Did you hear from more than one person, or was it one of your neighbors?
the only person I heard from her, and then, like I said, my wife just, because she sent it to both my wife and my wife said, yeah, I kind of noticed it too. Now, my wife noticed it, but my wife's pretty technically savvy, so she noticed those things. So that was the only reason I just wanted to ask the question about if I could divide those mobile answers, if I saw they were consistent among laptop and mobile, I'd feel very comfortable with the response, but without it, I was a little nervous, that's all.
Yeah, I don't think we can make an assumption one or the other. And for the most part, like I've taken I have taken like SurveyMonkey ones, like the Chicago Sky actually just sent one out. So, and it is noticeable to some extent that, you know, I want to rank this one and this two and this three, and it won't let you do that. So in some sense, it may just really, like what Dr. Borelli said, just revert somebody back to doing it on a different kind of device.
Does that,
Well, I wanted to bring it up because, like I said, for that particular, those particular questions,
Right.
it's a little sketchy, at least in my mind.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think we have to take the data for what it is, with, for the good and for the bad, assuming that there is some false positives in there, as you said. However, I think it would be somewhat difficult to repeat that.
Oh, I
That's,
can't imagine we could.
yeah. But that leads us to a more important question, and that's the consideration of the actual start date itself, irregardless of what the survey may have suggested. And there's pros and cons to both. So are there any comments that anybody would like to make, or questions?
Well, I will ask a question, just to see if this was considered and if it was rejected, why. And I make this question without necessarily having this be what I prefer, but I noticed that the proposed calendar is very close to District 207 in start and finish, but not quite. In fact, it's close enough to District 207 that if you moved the first day of school one day earlier, started on the Monday rather than the Tuesday, just like 207 is doing, and you took 3 days Thanksgiving week off rather than 5, which is also what District 207 is doing. If you match those two things that 207 is doing, you can also match their end date. So in other words, we are 3 school days later than them at the end, and that's because we start one day later, and we take 2 extra days through Thanksgiving that they do not.
And actually, we're only 2 days later than at the end of the year, because the 31st of May would be Memorial.
It's a holiday.
Well, that's why I prefer, because
It's not a school day.
we go the Tuesday,
Thanksgiving.
Wednesday, Thursday of that week, so that's the.
Just the Tuesday, Wednesday, didn't you say, that, or no?
In
Okay, I'm
November?
reading the calendar wrong. Okay.
No, in June,
May.
in June.
Or June.
So in any case, my question is, since we are so close, why aren't we identical?
It's a good question. So, we met in December, but we also met in November. And when we met in November, the survey hadn't been completed. So we had a smaller representative sample of our internal calendar committee because the date wound up just being very challenging for many. But what we showed the committee was a mock-up of the District 64 calendar that very, very closely, I think within like 1 day, mirrored District 207. And the committee, largely the teachers that were on the committee, were very uncomfortable starting school within that second week of August. They felt that giving teachers and the families 1 more week of summer, 1 more weekend would really matter. And then, you know, pushing Institute Day, not having Institute Day at the end of the week and then starting school at the end of the week was also better for our younger students. You know, going into that next week, so the first week of school is not a full week for kids or a chopped up week where they have their first day of school on the Friday, then it's the weekend, and we come back and then have a full week of school. Those were all points that the teachers, and I think some of the administrators, you know, didn't think would be a good thing for some of our younger learners. So that kind of was discussed and rejected in terms of starting school that second week of August. And they felt that it would be more palatable for staff and families to start that third week of school.
And I guess following up on.
Can I actually ask a follow-up question first? Can you help me understand why the young kids would start on a Friday? Because I think if we moved it up, everybody'd be starting on a Monday.
In terms of Institute Day and then kids coming on the 17th?
Yeah, so Institute
Okay.
Day would be the Friday,
I
and
thought you
school
were
would start the Monday.
saying here, because what 207 has is they're lucky, they have 2 Institute Days at the beginning of the year. So then you're saying, I apologize, if we did our Institute Day on the 14th and started school on a Monday,
Right.
I think just giving teachers that extra week off and that weekend off, second week of August, and not starting with Institute Day until the third week was the primary reason that was not approved.
Okay. Was there much discussion around the question of 3 days off versus 5 days off for Thanksgiving week?
An unbelievable amount of discussion.
Okay.
Like overwhelming. We were almost ran out of the room. It was, so much so that we discussed, are these paid days off, are these not paid days off? How do we get these days? Can they be taken away from us? And we spent a long time talking about that and how important it was to have that week off. And from the teacher's perspective, it was something that they felt was very important.
And
Anybody else in the
I guess-
audience that was there, would you agree?
I wasn't there, but I would just comment, I've been here for a long time. Anecdotally, I thought part of the reason we went to the 5-day Thanksgiving week is because so many of our kids don't come. The families plan vacations anyways, and they're gone. As it is now, our attendance on the Friday before that whole week drops with our kids. So I think historically, that's part of the reason.
That was discussed. One of the teachers did mention that even though they get a whole week off, that some of them do extend either before or after as well.
And then one other question on that is, as I look at the survey results on Thanksgiving break, question 4, surprised me because 61% of people said that it was unnecessary to have the whole week off, and only about 10% said that it was an absolute necessity. Do those numbers include teacher respondents, or am I only looking at parent respondents?
I'm trying to
So
find.
looking at question 4 of the survey.
it's a graph.
How important is it for District 64 to maintain a full week off?
At Thanksgiving.
46.31 members of the staff felt that it was absolutely necessary.
Okay.
25% felt very important. So we were kind of chunking those two together with all answers.
So when I see the 9.85% absolute necessity, is that just the parents? Is that
So
a
yeah, let me
mix of
see.
the
So that,
parents
those
and-
percentages, and that was around, what was that, around 70 something? That's from my staff survey.
No, it
Give me a
says the-
moment while I find
It
my.
says the total respondents, though, John, it's
Yeah,
12
well,
micrograde printer, 1,200. So that would include, basically, the
Yep.
numbers we got earlier would be everybody, because it was over 400 staff and 800 parents. So that is the
Mhm.
total subset
Right.
displayed there in that.
Got it. And so what I'm not seeing is
So
kind of
I
a marked
agree.
difference between the
Mhm.
teachers and parents on that.
See, but when I look at this survey, where this is just the calendar survey from parents, question 4, it's around 20% absolute necessity versus very important, versus the staff survey results that create a very different picture. Because I have them broken down in 2 different ways.
So, but yeah, I agree with John. It's, yeah, so the absolute necessity of their importance, approximately 20%, but then
Of
60% of the people
parents.
said, of just,
Of
well,
the-
no, this has
of
to be
the
the whole
1,200.
set. This is 1,200 people, so this has to be everybody based on what we said. So, pardon? Would be both
It's-
families and the teachers,
It's
wouldn't
2
it?
different,
Well,
no,
then,
see,
How could, earlier the comment was made that over 400 staff and 800, there were 1,200 people involved, so that would mean there were, so I guess what is the total survey size then? Those
According
were
to
the numbers
the-
we were given earlier.
the top of this survey, and this is the my parent survey results, tabbed in a different color. It says answered 1,229.
So that's,
Then staff answered 393.
The first memo actually says that. The very first paragraph of the beginning memo does say that there were 1,229 respondents recorded from parents and free. So it's on our memo. So
Question 4 that is all parents here.
does that
We
mean
don't have it
that
broken
we
out.
don't have the results for the teacher survey?
No.
Because I've only got one page of question 4
Yeah, I was
responses.
saying, we go
It
to
has
1,200
1,229 respondents, and 9.85% of them said that it was an absolute necessity to take the whole week off for Thanksgiving.
But
Right.
very important, I would clump with absolutely necessary.
Yeah, sure, well, whichever way, but I'm
Right.
just trying to make sure I've got
Yes, what are we
the
looking
same data you're looking at.
Yeah.
So we're only looking at parent responses on our pages here, it seems like.
Mhm.
Are there copies on the table, Lori or anyone that you could grab so the board sees both? I'm really not sure why that is. I don't know if that was a glitch in the upload, but we have, and our intention was for you to have them separately. We have one marked
Oh, I-
D64 staff and,
Now, there is a second one.
oh,
Okay, I
okay.
apologize.
Okay, my blood pressure's just,
Yeah,
Oh, I see, okay.
okay,
One of the disadvantages of looking at this online. It's hard
right,
to-
you can only see both sides. My apologies, I see I got that.
well, it's okay. I'm just happy that you had all the data, because that was certainly our intention, to make sure that you had both sets of survey results.
Okay.
And, you know, not as important for parents, but staff, it was 70% very important. Which is why we, when we did our second draft after the survey results, we added those 2 days in. Okay, other questions? So as you know, you now get to digest this, think it through, you can email questions. We will bring this back on our January agenda, and we really hope that by January we can have you vote and approve a calendar, because I know there are folks in the community and staff as well that are hoping to know what the 2015-16 school calendar will look like so they can plan accordingly.
Any further comments? I'm not hearing any. As long as we're talking about the calendar, I'm going to ask for the board's indulgence to make just 2 small comments that I should have made, actually, right after public comments. Our next meeting, by the way, is going to be held on January 26th. It's going to be held at Jefferson. And we will continue with this calendar. We'll be speaking about the Merit Award Program and class sizes. And there's going to be 2 meetings in February. The first on the 9th, the COW, to be held at Jefferson, and the second meeting on February 23rd, which will be our regular board meeting at Washington. Today, also, the 15th, was the first day for candidates wishing to run for board election will be able to deposit their packets. Today, there was 4 locations. Today only, there was 4 locations. Cook County Clerk's Office, downtown on Washington and Chicago, Arlington Racecourse, Hawthorne Distribution Center in Tinley Park, and beginning tomorrow until the deadline, which was the 22nd, applications will be accepted at the Cook County Clerk's Office on Washington and Chicago. That's 69 West Washington, 5th floor, as well as the Hawthorne Distribution Center. As everybody knows, that this year there's a change in policy, and the Cook County Clerk's Office is conducting the receival of the applications. I understand that there were some lengthy lines involved this morning, but already if you go to the Cook County Clerk's website, there are names up of individuals who have submitted applications and petitions to run for the election on April 7th of 2015. Okay. Sorry for that deviation, but the next topic in our agenda will be from the Director of Special Education Pupil Services, a report on the ELL and changing needs.
Before I turn it over to Jane, I just want to do a brief intro. So back in October, in one of my Friday memos to you, I gave you a little bit of background information in terms of our ELL program and just our effort as a new team to kind of get to know the staff and how we program and how we create eligibility for our students. Mrs. Boyd and Mrs. Frack are really working closely with the ELL department on our ELL program in general. But one thing we certainly noticed is that over the last 4 or so years, our ELL numbers have been on a steady rise. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jane. She's going to provide you some longitudinal trend data, as well as some programming data and some next step suggestions that we have for this year and beyond. There's Jane's family.
Here's my family. No. I knew it would be my family if this happened, and that's okay.
So cute.
Yeah. Okay. Before I go ahead through the presentation, I want to credit all the people that are partners in the EL program. So yes, it's myself, it's Assistant Director Mrs. Frey. Dr. Lopez plays a very important role, and so does Dr. Hines. One of the requirements in the state when you hit a certain number of EL students is that the district have a certain certified bilingual administrator as part of the team, and in this district, that's Dr. Hines. I also want to credit the EL teachers who are here tonight in support of the presentation and the program. Thanks for coming. I thought it was important to begin with a quote to really frame the value that second language learners bring to our district and all of the richness that we have because of that in the community and in the school district. The state is always changing vocabulary. I speak special ed, I speak AL too, so I thought it was worthwhile to just review some of the key vocabulary terms that
link to what's going on now. In terms of what the components of an excellent EL program, it would include the highly qualified EL instructional staff, the appropriate identification process, and we're about to review that, comprehensive individualized services, and we provide those, differentiated instruction in all settings, that's an area that we're going to target for expansion, evidence of effectiveness based on access performance, and I'll return to that near the end of the presentation, and then also informed and engaged EL parents. Who are EL students? This would be based on the definition that the state provides. It can be refugees, it can be immigrants, it can be children born here where the parents in that home speak a different language. It can be adopted children. It can be children who are visiting with their parents. The state is very clear about the screening that each district needs to use to identify students who are second language learners. So we are required to provide a home language survey at registration time. And these are the 2 questions that ISPE provides for us that we ask all students when they register, or ask all parents about their students. The answers to either one of those questions, if they answer yes, then that moves us forward into screening the student and determining what their level of English proficiency is at the time. This simply summarizes the process that comes from ISPE that guides us when we're identifying students for services. In some ways, the state is highly prescriptive with EL, in some ways more prescriptive than within special education. They set numbers and targets for eligibility. In addition to the screening process, there is a separate testing procedure that takes place, and that is access testing. The EL teachers this week were preparing for access testing and went through their training video. We are mandated to provide this testing to all students who are identified as second language learners, and access testing takes place in January. It tests 4 domains: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. It's all an English proficiency assessment. This will be the last year it's done in paper. Like many other things, it's migrating to a computer-based system in the future. The state then mandates scores that are required on this test in order for a child to be considered proficient and to move outside and beyond the program.
Can I add something to that?
Sure.
Slide? So this year, these last 3 bullet points represent a real rise in how kids exit the program. So they have to have this overall composite level of 5, plus reading proficiency in reading and writing. So what that means for ELs is not only are our numbers on the rise, our potential students exiting, their exit rate might slow because it's going to take them longer potentially to be cleared, if you will, and released from EL service. So that may seem like just a few bullets, but it's actually really pretty significant in terms of programming and staffing.
Any questions before I go ahead?
Yeah, just a tech question. Is this a nationally normed test?
How is X? Go ahead.
It's a state consortium that makes up WIDA, so it's not every state in the country. It's a handful of states, Wisconsin, and I could look it up, but it's not nationally administered.
But is it nationally normed, meaning where do they get their norms to which they compare each student who takes the test?
It's a very good question.
I'm just curious. I don't need to know right now.
I'll dig into my WIDA folder.
And
because if it's national, then national changes in the complexity of students change the boundaries and the limits and all of that. I'm just curious.
And the scores that we're looking at with students aren't so much focused on norm. We're looking at a power score. So when you see an access score result, you realize this student is a 2.4, this is what they'll need. This student is a 2.8, that student knows slightly more literacy. And we're looking at their advancement across the numbers.
So it's not a normed test in terms of like an IQ test is a comparison to many other people or a set of data.
Not at all bell-shaped.
Okay.
It's more, a newcomer scores at a 1, and a full proficiency scores at a 5.
Got
And that's
it.
what I was gonna say, it's a
Got it.
progression towards English proficiency in reading, writing, listening, and
Okay,
speaking.
so it's not dependent on the overall data, okay, got it.
And all students advance.
Got it.
Jane, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
And how are EL students, are they typically in that sort of designation within a school year, or does it last multiple years? And I guess, and is there a differentiation based on age, how long someone would be considered one, generally speaking?
All those variables figure into it. Some students begin at the lowest level, and that would be a newcomer to the country with no background in English. Typically, though, 3 to 6 years, roughly, that a student might start with an EL tag and carry it is very possible. So kindergarten through 3rd, with numbers going up like Dr. Hines just recommended, it's definitely a multi-year process of advancement. In a few minutes, we'll talk about how the services are adjusted based on their level of need.
Do all of these students take MAP?
If they're in that age group, yes.
Okay.
And we're sometimes asked, even if they're lower English proficiency, if they should take it. And my answer has been yes, even if that's just a baseline.
And
So
are
yes,
there-
they're all taking it.
Sorry to interrupt. Are there growth goals based on where they are on that spectrum?
That is a great question that one of your colleagues asked a few days ago. And there is a slide that'll talk about how we're recommending we kind of monitor the effectiveness of this. We're going to come to that.
And some of our next steps with candid descriptors, and we've got that's one of our areas of focus
To work
moving
on.
forward.
Back to the question of EL proficiency in the process, it's really divided into 2 categories. One is the more conversational mastery of English. Students tend to master that across about a 2-year period, so that if you pass them in the lunch line, they will appear English proficient. The more time-consuming and more intense process of learning the academics of speaking English, words like perimeter, that tends to take students between 5 and 7 years on average to fully master the academic vocabulary of the English language. ISBE has really designed 2 main types of program delivery models. One is transitional bilingual education. That is the service delivery model that ISBE requires us to use if we ever have one school location with 20 or more students speaking the same home language. So if we ever had a particular, it would be more likely in elementary school, where we registered more than 20 students of a particular home language, then we would be required to switch to the service delivery model. We currently don't have that kind of cluster.
That 20 can be spread across any age range, which is always curious
Challenging.
in terms of delivery.
Yes.
You could have 20 K-5.
Yes, they don't have to cluster by age to meet the requirement.
Just because they speak the same language.
In that model, when a district moves to that, or if we ever move to that in the future, then those students are in a separate homeroom, and there are really 2 goals happening in that class. One is the mastery and acquisition of the English language. The other is to maintain and develop academic skills in that first language. So while learning English, we would maintain reading and math skills in the first language, so no academic gap would develop. Those are the bilingual classrooms.
Jane, why did you say that's more typical in an elementary school than a middle school? Is it just, that's our experience?
Assuming that they are born or arrive when they're young children, this is typical in most districts, the number of EL students will be greatest K-1, 2.
Okay, thank
And
you.
then every year that some friends graduate out, the number goes down. The TPI program, which is what is in place here, is applicable when it's more a variety of languages. That is in English-only instruction. So that model uses pull-out, which means they leave their homeroom general education class, go somewhere else with one of the ESL teachers, and receive very specific instruction in English and English language acquisition. So they leave their class to learn English. It can be, in our district, we're striving for up to 1 hour a day for the students with the lower access scores, which would mean the greatest gap in their English proficiency skills. Again, here we have really two models going. The preschool model is an integrated model. All of our preschool teachers are also ESL certified. So those students remain in their homerooms, and the same teacher that's teaching the class has the expertise to differentiate for them. In our preschool classes, where everyone's learning English, so in this case, the teacher's adjusting for the second language learners that are acquiring English. Our K-8 model is the TPI service model, where the ESL teachers are pulling out. And this year, in some cases, that the staff is having to travel between buildings in order to cover the caseloads. And then also the ESL teachers are able to provide consultation for the general education teachers who are teaching these students the rest of the day. This is a little bit more about the assessment options. All three of these tests listed, so the ISAT that has become PARC, these students are participating in that test unless they're very recent newcomers, which would be almost no students in our district. We are including them in our Ames Web K-1-2 data and benchmarking, and then beginning in third grade, they are participants in MAP. In both of these options, we're measuring both their knowledge of English and their knowledge of the curriculum. It all blurs together. The third tool that we are using every year is the access test. I am recommending, based on some of your questions, that the best way to monitor effectiveness of an ESL program is with the access test. And the reasons that that seems most useful, one would be, is that in the changing land of ISAT and other things, access is a stable assessment. Access last year will be access next year. No plans to change the assessment tool. It focuses directly on the English language acquisition. So it's not impacted by changes in curriculum. We are only focusing on whether the students are progressing in their knowledge of English in those 4 domains. And it is the tool that ISBE uses to monitor program effectiveness. So ISBE sets access targets for school districts. What they're looking at is the growth rate of students across time. So the state judges, do you have a good ESL program? At what rate are your students growing in their access scores? So it's this tool they've already identified. So far, since I've arrived in the district, and Lori and I just talked about it, we haven't seen evidence of anyone carefully monitoring this. So I didn't open the folder that said, oh, here are the access scores across the last 3 years, and this is what's happening. So it's going on our to-do list. Just for interest, now I'm jumping to the data about this year. We speak 50 languages. And I thought you might like to see the most common, so that's what's on this slide. For each of these languages across the district, there are more than 30 students whose homes are speaking these. This is our data for this school year. We just submitted it a few weeks ago. Total district enrollment. There are 924 students in Park Ridge District 64 whose homes speak a language other than English. That's 20% of our homes. 50 different languages. Of those 924, once we did the screening to determine English proficiency, 256 were found eligible for service, which meant when we screened them, they weren't hitting those required scores in order to be not needing second language instruction. So 256 qualified to receive services from our staff. Parents do have the option of accepting the services or declining them. They can say, no, thank you, I'd like my child just placed in the general education classroom full time. There's a process for them to do that. That's why this number servicing is lower than the number qualified. This is our 5-year trending growth. So we were below 150 just a few years ago. And we have picked up over 100 students, well on our way to doubling in this 5-year period. So significant growth. This is what all school districts in the state are experiencing. So the growth of EL numbers is statewide.
Do we know why? Just out of curiosity.
The world's becoming more diverse.
And sometimes it has to do with, typically the trends will be when there's conflict somewhere in the world, you have movement from those countries coming through. That one slide that talked about refugees, and that's typically where we see, I know when I was in the neighboring district in Skokie, that's what we would see. We could track a conflict, and within a year or so, we would see an uptick in students from that country.
It's also increasing because those numbers, when the 5.0, 4.2, that means a student that a year or two ago would have possibly been exited. Now the state's saying they remain eligible longer. We have a higher bar before we dismiss, so that would cause all districts to be experiencing an increase. Even if their demographics locked in, their population needing service would go up.
And then Jane, do you know offhand when the home language survey through the ISB required those 2 questions to be asked?
How many years back?
Right.
I'm going to turn and see if any of them know. I'm not sure.
Because I think that has something to do with the trend data, because now the ISBE standardizes those questions, and if you answer either one or both of them yes, you're screened. So we're doing a better job as school systems catching kids that are eligible for support in EL, whereas before without those questions you might not pick up as many kids.
Yeah, I'm just curious, looking at the number of students that you had up previously, you know, that line's going up like that. I mean, do we have any way to sort of forecast, you know, is that going to continue at that angle or not? And what does that mean for us as a district then?
There is no clear answer to that question. 2 parts that come to mind. One would be, I'm not aware of them moving the bar again anytime soon. So before they went to 4.2, 5.0, there was a lot of discussion. We saw it coming. There's no discussion right now of moving the line. So in some ways, it might not increase as much as it is, but generally I would expect it to increase. Most districts are experiencing that steady growth.
Perhaps the rate of increase, the slope will come down a little bit because of no change in the 5 level.
It's possible,
Yeah.
but we'll just have to wait and see.
I do have a question though, Jane. We are required to provide services, correct?
Absolutely.
What I'm concerned about is two questions regarding that, therefore. Why is there a difference between those students who qualify and those students who actually receive services? It seems like if you qualified, you should be receiving services.
We would service all of them. Their parents have explicitly declined it.
Declined it.
Declined.
Okay.
There's a step in the process that the parents can overtly say, no, thank you. We do not want our child removed from the regular classroom. And that explains the difference. We offer the services to all the students that we're required to offer it to, and the parents agree.
Thank you. And the second half of that is, I looked at your lines there, and 2 years ago, in the year 12-13, it seemed that there were 4 teachers for 200 students, ratio of 1 to 50. And yet 2 years later, in 14-15, we have 50 students increased, 250, and yet our staff is increased by 2. So I'm just wondering, you know, ordinarily if you do the quick math, it should have gone up by 1. So why are we increasing our staff disproportionate to historical staffing levels?
If we go back, and I think there's another slide, we're coming to it, the ratio slide. Yeah. We've been increasing to adjust for the student increase. We have not managed to keep up with it. So the ratios that we had 5 years ago, we are above those. We've been adding, but not fast enough to keep up with the students. Lori reminded me about something related to the eligible versus the served, and it has to do with the impact on access scoring. The 256, I believe, were the students eligible. All of them will take access. The parents can decline the services. They cannot decline the participation in access testing. So most districts can disaggregate and see what's the access growth for the ones that receive the service and what's the access growth for the ones that the families decline. We'll be able to do that.
I'm kind of going back to a question Bobby had. How far back does our access data go? How many years would you say?
I don't know, but I can find out.
I'm just wondering if we could normalize the data, because I'd be curious about the trend as well, to think about this for long-term, financial forecasting and so forth. Because if you could say, let's up the bar to 5 from 4.2 on all that past data, I'd like to see that trend line, to be honest with you. So, I mean, in addition to this one's useful, but my guess is you might have had a step, and now you might change that growth rate, where if you could, kind of just apply the current standards to the old data, I'd be curious to see what that growth trend looks like.
I would agree with that. I think that's pretty important because ultimately you're going to want to know how fast is it going to grow in the future. And in the past, it's a combination of demographics, which you expect to continue, and a change in methodology, which you do not expect to continue. And if most of that upward line is the result of a change in methodology, well, then we don't need to worry about such a continued uptick. On the other hand, if it's mostly demographics, we do.
It would be a pretty fast way for me to look it up because I could just go to the home language surveys by themselves. Because then the number of families speaking the other language is separate from whether or not there was a 4.2, 5.0. Just are the families changing. That trend would be pretty easy to capture. We've been counting that for years. So I'll work on that graph too. This one shows you the number of teachers we have, and you can see that it was steady for several years, and we have been adding for the past 2 years. What's more important is what's happening with our ratio to students. So thanks to the additions that this board has supported across the last 2 school years, we are down from that original spot, but if we took the 10-11 ratio, or even the 11-12 ratio as our goal, as ideal before things were increasing, we are way above that now. And our EL teachers are feeling that in the quality of services that they can provide. They're doing a lot of traveling and trying to have it to manage their larger caseloads.
And in the memo back in October, we did talk about their difficulty, not for lack of trying, but just minutes in the day to cover the needs and deliver the direct service that's needed for their growing caseloads.
So in terms of next steps for our district, the team of us would really be recommending that we expand staff development opportunities for all teachers. That we haven't done enough with all of the teachers that are impacted by these students in terms of their skill sets and PSYOP and the WIDA materials. So that would be a growth area. As soon as I finish Title I, I'm moving on to exploring the EL funding options, and there are grants and methodologies that districts can use to help with the costs of EL programming, and that would be another direction we need to move in. We do need to consider the growth trends that you just saw and the ratio that you just saw when we develop staffing for 15-16. Those discussions have already started, and the information you just saw is part of that. And then beginning in the spring of this year, we need to use access data to monitor our EL program effectiveness, to look at our access growth rate, kind of like we're using MAP to study student growth in general. We should be also using access to study EL effectiveness.
I have kind of one general comment and then one more specific question. The general comment is, I like the idea of looking at the access data to figure out how effective our program is at teaching English. But that's not the only goal we have with these students. We also want them to learn the rest of the curriculum. And I'm worried about the gap that these students have with the rest of the curriculum. So if we focus only on access data, we're not going to see that gap. So I would hope that you would focus on that data or something else as well and explicitly look at that gap. Because I think as a board it would be useful to know in the same way that you're getting pressure right now to look at other demographic gaps and look at differences in racial performance, differences in gender performance. You ought to be looking at differences between English learners and non-English learners on things like math. Because I think if we have a large gap there, that's something we're going to want to judge our program on is our ability to narrow that gap. Because even if we had a program that does very well on access, if we continue to have really big gaps elsewhere, we'll still want to do something to improve that. So that's kind of the one comment I would make. A more specific question. Lori, it sounds like you're the certified bilingual
Mhm.
administrator. What is a certified bilingual administrator? And then my follow-up question is going to be, should I be worried that you're the certified bilingual administrator when you've got a gazillion other things to do?
So a number of years ago, as Jane said, the state said if you have more than 200 kids, somebody at the central office level has to have it. So as you know, I was working as an assistant soup in Skokie where there were 64 languages and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kids. So I said, well, I'll do it, because that's kind of how I am. So I took 6 graduate classes to earn my endorsement. So that's what it entails. You go, and I went to Loyola and I got my ELL endorsement. You could also go on and get a master's. So in terms of that, that was the process. Now, is it difficult because I'm the administrator? I can't always attend their meetings, even though I wish I could. But Jane and I are and Vasiliki are in constant communication. We're always talking about kind of where we are. Let's get the lay of the land, and then let's plan with the EL department in terms of what we'd like to see over the next couple of years. So I think for right now it's working consultatively. And then we've also talked about, so for last Institute Day, the EL department went through some PD. They did the Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. So they're getting trained in that, and I'm sure many of them had that training, but we're trying to standardize it now. We then need to look at what we're doing with Gen Ed. And I think just over the next couple of years, that's going to be another area of focus that we're all going to be kind of getting behind. Because these kids are in our classrooms, we need to know how to differentiate and use some of these protocols so they can access the content, which will also help us monitor that gap between our EL and our non-EL students. So we kind of have some preliminary ideas in terms of how we need to proceed, but it's going to be a big conversation that we'll engage in with the EL department probably this spring, and potentially even be some summer work to get further down the road in terms of what we'd like to see to support our changing demographic.
And if I can just add one thing to that, one of the things that we do when we look at our AIMSweb data and our MAP data is we look at students who are discrepant from the norm. And so oftentimes our EL students, as they're acquiring English, if they're sort of far enough along in that language acquisition process, are eligible for services, intervention services, like, for example, literacy or extra support in reading and math at the middle school level. One of the things that our literacy teachers have requested over the past couple of years and have participated in is professional development related to English language learners, so that as they're working with students in their small literacy groups, they're using the strategies that are most appropriate for language acquisition, in addition to supporting literacy development. But I think what we're emphasizing on that slide is that we'd like to look at the growth of the group over time, using both access and MAP to determine how they're discrepant as a group, that group piece.
And Jane, just 2 questions. One, and I'm not the best with technology. I don't know if you added some slides since we got the package. Would you be able to send us an updated slide packet?
I can do that. Jane, I have it right here on my computer.
And
Okay.
then the second question, and I don't know if this is a question better for you, Dr. Hines, or Bernadette, is, as you talked about that data, and 20% of the families have, if I'm getting that correct, another language spoken in their house. So, here we've been talking about the children, and certainly as a primary focus, but I wonder, as a school district, does that mean, a greater proportion of the adults in our community are not English language speakers? And then, is there something we should be doing differently as a district, trying in our communications that we're conducting, and with parents and everything, trying to reach people in the community? Are we missing some percentage here because they're not English language speakers? And what, if anything, could we do? I don't know if that's been a topic of conversation at all, but it's just a question.
That came up in a lengthy conversation when we were talking about using InfoSnap next year. I happened to be in the subgroup of staff that were trying to talk about which frames, what system, what about this fee, what about that fee. And we did decide to make several alterations in what families first see and a support system families can use, so that if going through the registration process they have their own challenges with English, that we'd be able to provide support for that. So we are beginning to look at it from the parent perspective as well. That wasn't so much the general information, but that was really to make sure there were no obstacles or minimize the obstacles at registration time.
Right, yeah, I guess I was thinking about, our other communications, whether it's our websites, the middle school principal newsletter, whatever. I know it could be a huge undertaking to, do everything, but I don't know, if this is a trend, what can we do to perhaps, improve our communication with the population?
What's the capability of our website?
There's a translation button on the website.
Yeah, so most websites have that, and I was just checking, so that if a family goes to our site and they need a language other than English, the site just allows them to select that. Probably means we need to more often use the website, because we can be sure then that families can access it in whatever language they need it to be in.
You mentioned there were grants and things of that nature, but I know grants are, you get them, you don't. But I wonder, just as this increases, it seems like the requirements of the district are going to increase, and that's going to. Does this change our formula at all for how we get state aid in any way as this number grows and grows and grows, or no, this is just a burden that has no relief from the state? Not a burden, but you know what I mean, it's an obligation without, is that how it works? Is there any, it doesn't change that formula back here or anything like
No,
that?
it may
If it grew,
Senate Bill 16 takes place.
okay.
Only if EL is linked to low income
Yeah.
would
Okay.
we be able to get money, and we don't want to assume that our ELs are low income. But if there's a connection, then we can take some of the funding and programmatic changes that we'd like to make out of the recently written Title I grant. So that's, as you remember, that's the first year we've done Title. So that could be moving forward in subsequent years. We can watch to see what can come out of Title to offset some of the cost of changes we might make.
Thank you, Jane. Any other comments for Jane? And if not, as I look out into the audience, I notice that we have some visitors here, and I'll direct the board to item A10 on our agenda, authorization to negotiate with preferred architectural firm. When this came up on the agenda, I thought that we would have this discussion. I didn't realize there would be representatives. So as a courtesy to them, I thought that perhaps the board would consider topic A10 next on the agenda and take it out of order, if you will. And if there's no concerns about that, Becky, if you could lead that discussion, please.
Most of what we do out of the business office is outlined and guided by the school code, and selecting a new architect is no different. The process is clearly defined that we have to issue and receive a statement of qualifications from licensed architects. We came to you on September 22nd and told you about the process that we were going to proceed with. The RFPs were issued, and on the day after the board meeting, September 23rd in the morning, by email. There was an optional pre-bid meeting clarified in the document, and we had 22 architectural firms attend that meeting. And finally, on October 28th, we had 12 architectural firms submit proposals. The proposals were reviewed by Dr. Hines, Scott Mackel, and myself, and we selected 4 firms to be interviewed. The interview committee, the selection committee, consisted of Dr. Hines, Scott Mackel, myself, Tony Borelli, Bob Johnson, Anthony Murray, and Andy Petrling. And we interviewed 4 firms, BLD, D, FGM, Leggett, and Green and Associates. We narrowed it down to 3 firms after that to bring back for a second round of interviews. And in addition, the firms took a tour with Scott Mackel and Brian Imhoff, the assistant business manager, to several of our facilities so that they could get a flavor of what our buildings look like. The second interviews were held on Wednesday, December 3rd, and the firms were given a homework assignment during that building tour. And what they needed to come back and show the selection committee is a rendering of what Roosevelt School would look like with a secured entrance, and how they would incorporate that into the makeup of the school. When all was said and done, the Architect Selection Committee ranked FGM, BLD, and Leggett Architect in that order. And what that means in that very defined process by the school code is that we negotiate with the number one ranked firm, which is FGM. Two representatives are sitting here tonight. And then we come back and ask the board to actually issue them contracts. If we find in our negotiations that we are unable to agree on cost, because this is one process in the entire school code that doesn't allow us to ask about money during the process. So if we were unable to negotiate what we felt were reasonable fees, then we would go to our second ranked firm. So we will begin, and we've already begun, working with Hodges Louisi to do contract review with FGM, and we will bring back a master contract that we add addendums to as we move through projects for facility master planning and the 10-year health life safety survey and any work that would come out as a result of any of those particular projects that will be done over the next several years. So what we're asking for tonight is authorization to negotiate with FGM.
Are there any questions for Becky on this topic?
Yeah, this is Dan. I have a question, and maybe it's for the architects if they're there as well as Becky. Dan and Howie's been our architects for quite a while now, and we're going to transition to a new firm here potentially. That's what it looks like. I'd like to get just a feeling for what we should expect would happen in a transition like this, as far as what kind of steps they take, what their concerns might be, and what experience they've had in transitioning on school districts' work from one architectural firm to another in the past, and has that gone smoothly?
Mr. Kerry Leonard from FGM has taken the podium, so I will let him respond to that question.
Thank you. The plan, we will map out a transition plan. There is a lot of work that has been done over the years within the district, and studies and reports that have done. Our plan is to basically gather up that material, to go through that. This is something we have done before, and to basically build on any work that's been done, but it's build and verify. We need to get into the buildings. That's why the rigorous process that we've been put through to get to this point. We've got to see several of the buildings. I figured the circuitous route to get to this school this evening. So we're getting to know the district with every day, and we want to review building plans. We'll work with Scott and his team and Becky and gather that information so that we can put together a proposal for the planning effort, which is really the first step, and then build on any work that's been done, but again, be able to bring in our engineers, be able to bring in our team, and get through the building so we see it with our eyes and really make it our own and are responsible for any opinions and any recommendations that we'll make going forward. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I just have one additional question. So what district have you ever done this before, and where you took over from a long-term architect, and just like an example of one that you've done this before, and does it go well?
I have over 30 years. Jim, you've got Jim Woods, my partner, is with me as well, and you've got 32 years. We've practiced in the Chicagoland area and for a number of districts, and we have over that career, our careers done this. Most recently, probably, what would you say, a similar sized district?
Well, a good example would be Geneva School District 304, which in 2005 we took over as the district architect for, after a number of years, actually really long years.
Maybe so Dan can at least hear it. That's right.
So in 2005, we took over as the district architect for Geneva School District 304, which had an architect been there probably 15
I'm sorry, I'm having a problem hearing you. So you took over in what district?
Geneva Community Unit School
Geneva,
District
okay.
304.
The architectural firm was there for how long prior to that?
15 plus years, and went through a similar planning exercise at that time in that process of taking over
and verifying the information that we were provided by the district to ultimately develop a facility master plan for that district.
If I may piggyback on that, during the interview process, one of the things that set FGM kind of apart from BLDD and Leggett was they kind of went above and beyond the homework assignment and actually had mapped out a 6-month transition plan, which we found quite impressive and we were poring over because they came to that round already saying, hire us because we have a big idea as to what we're going to do over the next 6 months. So you guys had already begun mapping that out in the event you would be awarded the contract. So I know the team was impressed by that, and it just showed that you have a sense of where we're going already.
Just as a quick question, are there any architectural firms that work with any school district in perpetuity?
No, not that I am aware of.
I didn't think so.
We currently represent about 93 school districts in the state of Illinois that we are currently working with, some more in depth than others because everybody at times has periods of great amount of work and periods of less amounts of work.
So we can make this the first year if we just keep doing a good job.
And Dan, I would just add that FGM will be the third architect in my 6 years here in the district. When I got here 6 years ago, we had Green and Associates as our architect. We phased them out and brought Fanning Howie in, and now we're moving forward and bringing FGM as our partner.
Are there any other questions or comments? From sitting on the committee, I can tell you that the deliberations were, I felt, very thorough, concise, and I personally feel very comfortable with this particular selection, obviously as the majority of the folks did on the committee. Bob, if you have anything to add.
No, I think it was a very good, thorough process, multiple interviews, very good results.
Yes. Any other questions or comments? And if not, this is an action item, so I'd take a motion if anybody's ready.
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, approve the negotiations of 2 contracts with FGM Architects. 1 contract that covers conditions and fees associated with project work, and a separate contract to complete the facility master plan and 10-year health, life, safety survey. Once contract negotiations are complete, a contract will be presented to the Board of Education for approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Why don't we start on Dathan's side?
Aye.
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
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 Danny?
Aye.
Okay. Congratulations.
Great. Thank you very much,
You
and
bet.
I really do appreciate the confidence that you're showing in FGM, and Jim and I will be working on the project. We'll be here hopefully for many more meetings to come, and our commitment really is to you and to the students here that to do the best job we can. So thank you.
Great.
We'll see you soon.
Welcome aboard.
Our next topic is, now I've got to go back in this darn computer. I'm looking at something else. Bless it. All right.
Page 49.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for. I would love to have a button that makes you jump back and forth. MJ. That was in my email this weekend, by the way.
Yes, I saw that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Lori, would you like to start?
You bet. So last month, at the November 17th meeting, we took a look at Board Policy 7-60 regarding residency, and we had talked about a particular case within the community and where we stood in terms of honoring the 7:7:60 residency policy, or if we wanted to potentially craft a different policy in hopes that it would be more palatable and actually reflect our practice moving forward. So one of my directives from our November meeting was to follow up with our legal counsel to determine if we in fact could, deviate from school code, deviate from our current policy. What might that look like? What would happen to be Terry Hodges that I spoke to? What might she recommend? And as I've written in my memo, she said that really, it certainly is up to the board to, write a policy that they think, reflects how you would like residency to be monitored in district. So Terry's recommendation certainly was, and you can see it italicized within the memo, based on the residency scenario that we were really talking about, we could do something very similar to military families, where they're allowed to have a certain level of provision for people coming in and out of, owning homes for their military service. So, for example, she recommended in terms of somebody doing a major renovation, a tear down, or a reno of any sort, we understand that people are displaced because their home's under construction. And if we wanted to allow them to remain in our schools, because we believed that they would, upon completion of the construction project, move back in and actually continue to be residents that meet that two-pronged test of where the kids sleep, as well as that intent to enroll their children in our schools, we could write the policy however we wanted. And I asked Terry, well, what would you recommend? And she said, a year seems reasonable. But then I shared a few scenarios amongst members of our board where construction went beyond a year before you were able to, retake ownership and keys to your home under construction. So Terry's recommendation within the memo is italicized. It's a starting point for us for discussion, and we can really set what type of parameters we would like in terms of residency. So that's the first part of our work today, and then we'll get to re-verification as the second step. So what do we think of Terry's language? And
As one member who's talked about this a lot, I like the idea. I like the idea of the form that she talks about. I think that's all the idea. I think 1 year is too little, so I would look towards 18 months to 24 months. That's what I advise, is we go to 24 months or something like that. I mean, these are people building homes here and increasing property values. I like the idea of encouraging it.
Scott, what would you feel about putting something in there where at the end of 12 months, if the city of Park Ridge won't give you an occupancy permit, like for instance, they wouldn't give me an occupancy permit because I didn't have grass in, but it was January.
Right.
Really? January, you want grass? So, and they allowed us to move in.
Right.
I had to have a signed contract that grass, sod was gonna be placed at some point. Would there be, would you feel comfortable with a provision to the effect that at the end of 1 year, if there's extenuating circumstances present, they could request to the board on an individual basis, and then we would look and see, is this reasonable? There's a little subjectivity to it, and I'd like to have it a little bit more concrete, but this is our experience shows that it's kind of a flexible situation.
Yeah, I'd certainly entertain that idea. I mean, I just like to take out ambiguity or put the onus on anyone like us, where we could be in jeopardy of looking as if we're favoring a situation versus not. That's why I was thinking that, something 18 months or greater seems very, very reasonable, presuming it's from the start date of whenever they move out or something like that. I don't want to do it where it's some weird beginning of the school year. It should be, it takes up, somewhere around there to get some construction, and if it takes longer than that, well, then you're going to have to pay tuition. But I would just like to go a little longer than 12 months. I think that's reasonable, given what I've seen in this community for construction.
In 12 months, I had a whole.
Right, exactly.
I don't have strong feelings on this particular residency issue. The one comment I would make is that if we are going to set a time limit and then have case-by-case extension of that, I would recommend that the superintendent, rather than the board, have the authority to give the case-by-case dispensation. I don't think this board should become a judicial tribunal for individual people asking for stuff.
And then perhaps that could be written in where if an extension is necessary, you have to seek authorization from the superintendent. But I would also defer to Scott's thought, 12 months is too short. Yeah. And I think it needs to be extended out. 18, it took me 18, that's pretty generous, but.
Yeah, so maybe it's 18, and if you need something more, you have to do
Yeah.
like that, something like that. That seems reasonable to me.
that's a long time.
Well, you haven't built a home in Park Ridge.
Yeah.
True.
We haven't changed the zoning requirements the day before you're supposed to move in and say, oh, sorry, still gotta do it.
Exactly.
And what would we say, so I know, I agree with the, the 18-month thing, and I know when this thing was written up, it said a school year plus summer break, so I was almost reading that, if somebody moved out in April, does that mean they only got that period of time and then not the rest? But if we set some period of time, and then let's say that magical date of 18 months lands in, January or February, then what happens at that point? Because I don't know if we have the ability to be able to force someone to leave, our student to leave our district at that point in time during the school year.
We can't, once they're matriculating, they have to finish.
So I just want to, bring that up just as of something of, how we administer this is that it could be, we could say 18 months, the period could end up being longer than as it continues through perhaps the end of that school
I think
year.
that's why Terry was saying a year or a school year, because then you get to decide, have that conversation, where are you in the process, what does it look like before they start that second year? Because as you know, once they attend the first day, they get to stay with us. She also talked about some districts will, in a situation like this, they'll request and hold a tuition check. So if you're moving into that second school year, you may request a check, you're gonna hold it until they proceed through the process. If they don't, in fact, then take ownership back, they decide to move out, sell the house, don't finish the project, you have a level of safeguard. If they stay within that second year, you've got the tuition.
I understand we can't obviously eject them from the system in the middle of the school year, but I don't think we're prohibited from sending them a bill, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, you
That's-
can do it
you can,
proactively.
right.
not-
Right, so what I wonder is if you get to that January and your time's up and we haven't granted an extension, could we just send you a bill and it's just like any student fee? You gotta pay it or,
And whether they pay it or not is the issue.
well, whether they pay it or not is the issue, I understand it, and we'll have some delinquent, I understand, but it's the same as a student fee. You go right, it goes right on your credit report, you didn't pay a bill, you owe. I wonder if we could do something like that, because, yeah, I get the 12 months, but then you're timing everything, it's kind of an unusual timing. It just seems like it's a burden on our constituents. I think 18 months is reasonable, and if you hit a date, and you're in the middle of it, and you go beyond it, and you don't get the extension, well, here's a bill. We'll collect most of them, we won't collect all of them, I don't know.
I like your logic on the time frame because I think it's realistic, but I like what you just said about the calendar year. At least it forces a conversation before we start the school year. So it's just something I think we have to solve
Scott, how
long
about
term.
you're right. What about one calendar school year plus a portion of another not to exceed 18 months? And that would somehow obviate some of Bob's concern, because you're right. If you started in, let's say, October, you're going to have that whole year plus all of the next year on top of that. It's a 2-year thing. So not to exceed 18 months, but it's one full calendar year. So that really limits them to a couple of months, which means they would have already started 1 year. And if there's hassles, they're granted basically 1 school year. Because they're legit for the 1 year. They're just partializing that, and then we're giving them the 1 year, the 12 months. So that might be a way to rephrase it. 1 school year plus portion of another, not to exceed 18 months.
And I think Terry liked the check up front, because then doesn't become a collection. In order to, to continue into a new school year, part of doing that is us taking that check and holding it.
How much would the check value be?
Depends how many days are involved.
Well, a year's tuition right now is almost $14,000.
$14,000. And to ask somebody to write a check and say, hang on to this, don't cash that, that's...
In my other districts, when we would accept a check and hold it and not cash it, which is really hard for me, is we take certified checks, which meant they could have had a hold on their funds, which grants them, gives them an incentive to.
It's interesting. I really want to be liberal with a family that is honestly trying to build a new home that is going to increase the tax base. I really want that to occur. By the same token, I want to get incredibly aggressive, even more so aggressive in terms of those who are trying to cheat the system knowingly. So there's this part of me saying, I just default to simplicity. You get 18 months, if you go beyond, we'll send you a bill. If we collect 50%, we'll collect 50% of them. After that second school year, right, they get those 4 months of the school year, they're not coming back anyways, because it's been going on too long there. So maybe we're cheating ourselves out of a few months here and there, but I think it's gonna wash out, it's not that many homes. You know what I'm saying? So I'm just kind of deferring to simple, and again, Tony, I love your idea, I think it's probably the better idea. I just worry, how do you communicate that to families? How many cases come, I didn't quite know that, you didn't really advertise it to me. You know what I mean? I just wanna make it simple, real simple. You got 18 months. After that, if you're still in school year, we start sending you a bill.
Well, and I think Terry was very crafty when she wrote that first sentence. When a resident student, so that's a current resident, not somebody who's just coming into talking about us saying, there's an empty lot here, I want to build a house. So that they had to have been a current resident too.
Yeah, that needs to be clarified.
Yeah, I like that. And again, I'm just one board member, so if you guys decide you want a more elaborate system, by all means, I'm not gonna not vote for that. I just think we need to be a little bit reasonable.
I actually agree with you 100%. I've been convinced that even a more liberal is okay with me. As long as they're paying taxes on that property, they are putting money into the system, and they will, with the idea that they're gonna put more into the system once the project is done. I don't see why we wouldn't give them a lot of leeway there.
For that reason, I don't think that we should be doing the check thing from.
Yeah, I'm not big on that tuition thing.
Yeah, I like the idea as well, and I like the simplicity of it. And Dathan, you make a very good point. I mean, these are folks who are paying into the system.
Right.
In some ways, it doesn't even really matter whether they finish the house as long as they keep ownership of it and keep paying the taxes on it.
They get a reduced tax rate, correct?
They do get a somewhat reduced tax rate while they're under construction, but they're still paying something.
The problem with all that, and I think we kind of thought that this was fair before when we talked about this, but Lori, how does that juxtaposed with the school code that mandates that not paying taxes is not sufficient? You have to have that as your abode. So if we do this, and I want to just clarification, per Terry, this is not illegal.
Right, our policy would just trump the code.
Okay. And that's okay.
And really what I'm looking for is just a policy that we're all comfortable with me upholding. I'm the foot soldier here, so if you tell me this and parents are coming with different scenarios, I need to know with certainty how far, I can lean into this policy and know you're gonna back it. So if you're saying that this language, that Terry has crafted potentially, says what we want it to say, if we make the addition for a period not to exceed 1 year, we could put 18 months. Do we have a language here that this board is comfortable with?
Well, it would have to be 18 months from the day that the project began.
Yeah, when they move out.
Or when the student stops being a resident.
Yeah.
I think the language that is in here captures that already. I'm not sure you need more language in order to do that.
Not to exceed 18 months?
As long as you get through the words.
Do we believe that it's clear enough that these are already permanent residents? Do we?
That might be the one place where I might make a change in there. I might say when a
Current student.
yeah when a
Current resident?
I don't know if you can say that with
change of
roles.
abode, when the change of abode of a student who previously was a current resident, something like that. Run that by Terry, because that's very rough and right off the top of my head. But something like that, just to make it a
Currently
little
enrolled in
clearer.
District 64 school.
I like her writing. When a resident student's change of abode is due to a temporary need of the student's health.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, if legally it's clear, then that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, if Terry pushes back and says it's already clear, then it's fine with me.
Yeah, and she
As
wrote
I
this-
glance at it, it looks just a little subtle to me.
And she had it for some time, but I will go back to her and let her know we're gonna change 18, from 1 year to 18 months, and if there's anything that she would recommend doing to the paragraph that would make it explicitly clear that it's a current kind of legitimate resident moving out. So I'll ask her.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if this is something that, whatever the form is when somebody signs up to join the school district, or getting on to our next point, sort of verifying the residency that if we have this planted somewhere on the bottom or something, then
In the annual manual that we
make
sign.
a claim that, you had to have seen that when you join the district or whatever, so that we
Mhm.
can't, somebody can't say, you
I
buried
didn't know.
online and
Uh-huh.
point 10.3.4 in your school code, how did I know that that thing existed?
Yeah.
I think that annual book that we put out, and everybody gets a copy of it.
The handbook,
Good
the
spot as
student
well.
handbook?
In addition to signing up to the district, reminding them every year, it's in there with every other little requirement about when you, what you're supposed to wear.
I'm sure your wife read it.
Right here.
Okay, part two, proposal. Is there any other comments on this particular topic? If not, then part two.
Part two. So proposal for re-verification. Again, at our last meeting, we talked about the re-verification process. Then at an administrative council meeting on December 4th, we discussed and developed a recommendation for the re-verification of residency. So as you know, kids typically come into when they come into kindergarten, they register and they provide proof of residency. We talked about, is that enough? Do we want to try to do this every year? If every year seemed, as you know, 207 is doing, granted they're only doing it with 4 grade levels and we have 9, we discussed a variety of options, and I think the administrative cabinet is proposing that we do a re-verification 3 times throughout the school year. So 2 additional. Kindergarten will stay as always. We
Not
will
the school year, but the school career.
the school career, sorry. It's getting late, I apologize. So kindergarten, as they join us, which is typical, upon entering into 3rd grade, and the rationale there is kind of they're ending their K2 primary years and they're moving into the intermediate phase of their tenure with us. And then again, upon entering 6th grade, which as you know, they're in the intermediate and they're moving on to their middle school years. So that would be our proposal in terms of the re-verification 3 times within what we presume and hope would be a 9-year stay with us. Then we had an InfoSnap meeting, and we started really talking about what that online registration, that process would look like. And families will be able to do InfoSnap registration system where they can check their contact information and they can pay fees and they can do that all online. To accommodate the district's traditional kindergarten enrollment, we know that that process needs to be up and running in February. So pretty quickly after the winter break, we're going to get kind of all of that moving. It's one more thing for the tech department to work on. And InfoSnap for the 2015-16 school year is really scheduled to be functional at the end of that month. So in anticipation then for that annual InfoSnap update, for kids that are currently enrolled, that process would begin in March. We would begin in March to finalize the timelines for the rest of the students to be able to, and their parents to register, doing everything electronically through InfoSnap. We know with that we need to do a lot of parent communication because that's a change in practice for our parents. It's something they're only just beginning to get used to. So that is something that we also need to build into our timeline. So with that in mind, then the residency re-verification will be integrated into InfoSnap. And if the board agrees to this overall schedule and recommendation, then in our January meeting, we will really come up with firm deadlines. We didn't want to put too much into the timelines, not knowing where we would land. But if we get the go-ahead to re-verify 3 times, or if you authorize us to do a different number, once we have that information, we will put a working group together to get this really mapped out for you, and at the January 26th meeting, have a plan and a timeline for you.
So just out of curiosity, so what, if InfoSnap, so you're talking about InfoSnap would be the tool to use to assist with the residency validation?
That's how folks would register online. And when we've talked about the possibility, and it's a rough idea because we haven't mapped it all out, if we did either stations or if we did live registration where they had to bring in those, two pieces of proof of residency from this category and 1 from this category, that would be more live, somebody taking it and checking it, but the rest of registration and the fee structure would be through InfoSnap.
Okay.
But we see these 2 kind of things needing to happen.
Okay, so you're
simultaneously.
still then there would be a process where someone
Yes.
would need to physically present their.
We think so, yes.
Okay, no, I'm not arguing, I just wanted
No,
to
I-
ask, and I think that
I-
sounds fine to me.
I had 2 comments on this, and one comment was that in the process of exploration on how to do this, I'm concerned that it be expeditious and it be cost neutral or cost minimal. That's one factor that I would hope that would be factored in, and somehow, I don't know how, I haven't looked into it, but I would hope that their electronics somehow can be brought into this, that there can be some verification done through online. The second thing, before we go headlong into this and make this a policy from now until the end of the times, the thing is, we should do this as a policy, as a pilot for the first year, and look at the data. And if we get 15 kids, okay, then let's keep it intact. And if there's one or two, I want to have the opportunity to revise the schedule. Maybe you don't do it, or maybe you only do it for the third graders for that year, or it gives you the opportunity for flexibility without stating and creating a policy that you're forced to adhere to going on. So that's perhaps you would consider that.
It's a nice idea, because then you would have an idea of calculating the costs. Because you're going to incur something, and we could just do a simple cost balance, right? It cost us an extra $2,000.
Right.
Okay, and we caught 5 people, well, it's probably worth it, but it's not, nothing's $2,000, but you know what I'm saying?
No, I get
This is Dan. I like Tony's idea of a pilot. The only spin I would put on that is that I would strongly encourage us to do a pilot of all the grades, not just pick grades this first time around. I would like us to do the whole school or the whole district, all the grades, and figure out how many kids are not in district at one time. I don't want us to just pick certain grades. Let's do the pilot the first year and see how many people we find, and then from there take that input and figure out if we want to have sporadic testing, if we want to do it again following year across all grades, or again we want to do it just at select grades. But I strongly feel this is important, and I strongly feel the first year out of the gate we should do all the grades.
And Dan, this is Bob. What would you think about, thinking about this in sort of a pilot phase? What would you think about doing this first year with the 3rd and 6th grade? And then if we find that that's been a fruitful sort of event, then maybe consider expanding it. I guess I'm just sensitive to, we've never done this before. I don't know, how many staff resources will be needed for this, and when we're doing it the first time. So I don't know if maybe thinking about that pilot concept, should we, pilot, and then depending on how things go, say, oh wow, well we just did these 2 grades and we got these sort of results. Should we consider expanding it then to a larger population? Or I don't know what other people think of that.
That would be my preference as one board member. I love the grades that you picked, but I think what we're talking about all coincides. I mean, I definitely think it has to be face-to-face because of the reasons we talked about at the last meeting. You might dodge the line, and it's going to take time, but here's a time where we can also find out where people are living. Here's a great opportunity to say, oh gosh, I'm doing a tear down. So you're doing more face-to-face, and you're going to get so much more information. I was thinking initially they could get the Chromebook when they signed up for this too, but it sounds like maybe the time frame won't work.
No, you'd want to do this before you let people be
Because-
slotted to be starting school
Yeah.
at a certain grade. And I think I also want to highlight that, District 207, it's not a face-to-face exercise here. It's you physically drop paper off, or you could even mail it if you so chose, but you just drop paper off. So somebody doesn't actually validate you on the spot. They just take your materials, they set it down, and you walk away. But still, you have to supply the documents, and you have to supply them in a paper form. So that's how it works, at least at 207.
I have a question on the pilot aspect of this, and I'm trying to figure out what a pilot would mean in this context and what information we would learn from it. Just in thinking about it, I wouldn't think that somebody would drop off a registration packet that would reveal that they do not belong in the district. So my guess would be that, let's say we've got 5 families that currently say they live in the district but are unable to produce the documents. And so these are the people we catch if we did this. I'm betting that if you do this, those 5 people just don't register. And so as a result, you do your pilot, but you never know whether you caught anybody.
But they don't
Well, you're
re-enroll.
gonna know when your enrollment comes.
I suppose, right, you could go back and you could check and say,
Who's not
why did I lose this person after fourth grade? But then I guess my question is, are you gonna be able to tease that out from people who just moved during the course of the year? I mean, are you gonna know that that person was cheating before versus that that person moved?
The only way we would know is typically when a family moves out of district, the new school asks us to send records. The only way you would potentially know is if when the records were sent to, an Edison Park School, typically there's a secretary-to-secretary phone call, conversation to say, is this a new student or have these students been with you? That
Well,
would
we record
potentially be the only way that we would know.
Re-record that, and you could cross, you could just
Sure.
create an extra column in the Excel spreadsheet saying, here's all the students who left, and here's the ones that asked for it, and then we could infer to a reasonable extent.
No, you still don't know if they moved or, yeah, there's no way to know the.
Another school would ask for those records.
And
have
that
to
said, I
have
mean,
a reason.
there are other things you can learn from the pilot too, even if you can't learn that, you can learn, for instance, how smoothly it went. I mean, that's something you can find out. The other comment I would make, and, it kind of goes back to figuring out what the cost is and the cost benefit. As we figure cost, I would, if we're gonna do this as a pilot, I would survey parents about how much time it took them. Because I would assign a cost to the parents. So it's not just how much taxpayer dollars we spend, it's also how much taxpayer time we force our parents to input. And I think if you value the time that the parents spend and you even put minimum wage on it, you're gonna end up in the tens of thousands of dollars as the cost for this program. Now, the way the administration has proposed it, with only 3 grades being tested, that's only about 1,500 kids a year. If I do an hour per child at $10 an hour, that's a $15,000 cost. That's not bad. All you have to do is catch one person and you've broken even on it. If, on the other hand, we're going to do all 9 grades every year, now at that same thing, we're costing $45,000 a year for that. And, now you've got to find more people in order to make that worthwhile. So for me, it's a matter of this needs to pass a business case that the cost is, that the benefit is worth the cost. And for me, the business case has to include the cost of the families as well as our budget cost.
MJ, in the distribution of the individual computers in the beginning of the year, when is that, in the future, when will that distribution occur? Before the start of school, after the start of school? What will be the timeline for that? I'm just picking up on something Vicki said that kind of makes sense if you can tie things in. If folks have to attend the school anyway to physically pick up this device, they could hand in paperwork, pick up the device, and go from there.
So you would be able to do that for new students only, right?
So what we're asking
Everybody
is,
else is gonna have their Chromebooks already from this year?
do you keep
Well,
them
they
on
turn them in.
the summer?
We plan on doing that at what?
And having an office?
Yeah, and I guess the thing would be, I think from a planning perspective, we want to know what our student population is going to be in the
That was one of the
spring
things
or
that
summer,
I-
so that we are adequately staffed for,
And not overstaffed.
right, for the fall, start of school in the fall. So I think you have to do this sort of, in the latter part of the school year, so that who you're going to have